Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us here today. I'm here with the Minister of Environment, Rebecca Schulz. I also have Ministers Mickey Amery, our Minister of Justice, and Minister of Energy and Minerals, Brian Jean, here with me as well. They may have to go because we're on 1-minute bells, but they will be able to come back and answer questions if they end up getting called out of here. But we are here today to announce that we'll be putting forward a government motion under the Alberta Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act in response to the federal government's use of oil and gas emissions cap regulations. We've been very clear that we will use all means at our disposal to fight back against federal policies that hurt Alberta, and that's exactly what we're doing. On November the 4th, Ottawa released details of its oil and gas emissions cap, which is a de facto production cap. The cap violates Section 92A of the Constitution, which clearly gives provinces exclusive jurisdiction over non-renewable natural resource development. When it's in place, this cap will require a production cut of 1 million barrels a day by 2030. Estimates indicate that 150,000 workers across the country will lose their jobs, and tens of billions of dollars will disappear from Canada's GDP and government revenues, devastating the economy and public spending. That includes a forecast 5% decline in revenue for Alberta by 2035. Ottawa seems to think that they need to save us from ourselves, but they are wrong, because we're not just working with industry to continue to drive down emissions, we're succeeding at it. Alberta already has a system in place that is working. Emissions per barrel are declining, even as production and contribution to GDP grows. Alberta's energy industry doesn't just provide jobs to Albertans, but to Canadians all across our country. And it doesn't just power Alberta's economy, it powers Canada's. By now, you've seen our Scrap the Cap ads to unite workers, businesses, and governments in support of our energy industry, energy security, and economic affordability. Those ads are running right now across Canada. We are warning everyone who stands to lose from the cap, which is pretty much all Canadians. We're telling Ottawa to throw out this ill-conceived activist fantasy and get behind Alberta's leadership by investing in real technology that cuts emissions without wrecking Canada's prosperity. Because this cap could further stall investment in emissions reduction and undermine the effectiveness of existing provincial approaches that are driving reductions. We know that we need to do more than just marshal facts in our favor and make the case. We're fighting back with every weapon in our arsenal. The Alberta Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act was designed to protect our province from unconstitutional interference, and now we're going to use it again. The motion we're putting forward in the legislature uses the Act to ask the Legislative Assembly for approval to shield Alberta if the production cap becomes law. These actions could include an immediate constitutional challenge in the courts, a ban on provincial bodies enforcing the cap, labeling oil and gas production facilities as essential infrastructure subject to the Alberta Critical Infrastructure Defence Act, prohibiting the entry of all individuals into these facilities except those licensed to enter by the Alberta government, and declaring all information related to greenhouse gases at these facilities to be owned by Alberta's government, with data reported or disclosed at our discretion. This is not a complete list of everything we plan to do, but it's a sign of things to come. It shows how we will respond if the federal government forces us to do so. If the motion passes, we'll act fast to get ready for Ottawa's destructive cap. Albertans expect no less. We'll defend Alberta's prosperity, Alberta's livelihood, and our energy industry. This motion marks an important step in our pushback against federal overreach. We're telling Ottawa, your cap goes too far. This is not the way federal-provincial relations should be. It's certainly not the way we want them to be. We would much rather cooperate with them for the sake of a cleaner environment and stronger, more prosperous nation. We could have both if they would just listen to reason, and they've chosen their path, so we've chosen ours. And the fight will continue for as long as it has to. And it's not only us who are standing against this cap. From the moment the federal government released their regulations, businesses and organizations have been standing in opposition, like Eric Nuttall, who is Senior Portfolio Manager at 9 Point Partner, who said, and I quote, "Look around the world. No other major oil and gas producer is doing what we're doing. It behooves us to take a moment and ask, well, why is that? It's economic idiocy." and Francois Poirier, the CEO of TC Energy, who said, and I quote, "An emissions cap, which will act as a cap on domestic production of natural gas, will harm Canadian families and businesses by raising prices on energy." And Colleen Collins, VP of Canada West Foundation, who said the cap is, quote, "a significant intrusion on provincial management of resources." Albertans are relying on us to stand firm on this, and we will not let them down. And now I'd like to turn it over to Minister Schulz to share more.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Premier, for your leadership in this area. After years of trying to reason with this out-of-touch federal government, our province faces a choice: secure our economic future and the livelihoods of all Albertans, or let Prime Minister Justin Trudeau sacrifice our prosperity for his extreme ideological agenda. As Premier mentioned, we are standing up for Alberta by creating a constitutional shield that will stop Liberal NDP politicians in Ottawa from shutting down our oil and gas sector with an unconstitutional and reckless production cap. We are forced to take this step because continuously Ottawa refuses to listen. They are dead set on implementing a de facto production cap that will put hardworking men and women out of work, decimate rural communities that rely on the energy industry. The same goes for a number of First Nations communities who are already investing in this sector. It will eliminate billions of dollars in revenue that go towards schools, hospitals, and other vital services that people rely on each and every single day, not just in Alberta, but right across our country. It will also add more costs onto the backs of families across the country. This cap risks the reliable, secure, and affordable energy that put Alberta on the map and that Canada relies on. It will make every aspect of our lives less affordable while having virtually no impact on reducing global emissions. Capping our production does not cap the world's energy demands, but it certainly does increase how much coal and other higher polluting energy is produced by less responsible jurisdictions around the world. 3 different reports, as you all know, from internationally recognized reputable firms have shown that this cap is bad for businesses, bad for families, and bad for our economy. And it's not just them sounding the alarm. The Business Council of Canada has said that the cap will, quote, "only make Canadians poorer," while the Calgary Chamber of Commerce says it would, quote, "create more uncertainty, stifle investments, and ultimately leave Canada further behind." We also saw the Canadian Association of Energy Contractors come out against this cap, claiming that this proves that, quote, "the Trudeau government does not care about Canadian blue-collar, middle-class energy workers who rely on the industry to support their families." Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who has never struggled to pay his bills or put food on the table, has been telling Canadians and Albertans that they ought to prioritize Minister Stephen Guilbeault's green agenda over feeding their families or paying their rent. The federal government should not be willing to undercut Alberta's economy just because we don't vote for them. They seem to just be trying to placate their eco-activist base in Ottawa as they collapse in the polls. They are chasing headlines and sound bites while playing politics once again with people's livelihoods. This is unacceptable. We voiced these concerns to Ottawa many, many times, only to be dismissed and ignored. We will not be sidelined or silenced. Our Premier's leadership on this has been second to none. We will defend our province and the livelihoods of all our people. This constitutional shield will help protect our economy, the jobs of Albertans, and ensure that provincial jurisdiction is respected, not ignored. That's why we're here today. This motion sets Alberta up to challenge this cap in the courts while preventing its enforcement in our province. Yes, these actions are bold, but I believe they're necessary, and we will be exploring the most effective ways to implement each one of them. But make no mistake, we will do whatever it takes to protect Alberta's prosperity and our future. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Minister. We have time for a few questions this morning or this afternoon, so it'll be 1 question, 1 follow-up. Please state your name and outlet for the record.
I should maybe mention, I thought we were saving it for your notes, but one other aspect of it is taking our bitumen royalty in kind, our conventional oil royalty in kind, our natural gas royalty in kind, and then using our Alberta Petroleum Marketing Agency to market our products directly as a way not only of being able to meet the needs of some of the consumers from around the world who have come here asking us to do this, but we think it also might be a way for us to be able to work with our American friends and counterparts to be able to provide them the security that they need for a North American energy security policy. So that's another aspect. It's a plan that has been in place for some time. APMC was established in 1973 under Peter Lougheed under similar circumstances to take ownership of the resource in order to put up that constitutional shield. And with that, I'd be happy to take questions.
Okay, we'll start here in the room. Emma.
Emma Graney, Globe and Mail. A lot of these things that you're proposing, it kind of has this, it's like the provincial government is trying to exert control over private companies, about their information, about who they can and cannot let onto their property. The company data, you guys want to control that as well. How do you think that that actually meshes with, A, the UCP being pro-business and allowing businesses to do what, you know, they like, and also international laws and reporting requirements that businesses have to tell shareholders, like GHG emissions, for example?
Well, I would say that the federal government forced us into this. They've made it impossible for private sector companies to be in compliance with the law without running afoul of C-59. If they even tout what their emissions reduction successes are, they could be found criminally responsible. And so they actually created the situation where we have to find a way to be able to do reporting on our emissions reduction because they have given a carve-out to the province. So that would be number one. We're responding to Bill C-59, which prevents the companies from talking about their environmental records. But number two, most Albertans know that they own the resource. It is owned by the government of Alberta, and it is stewarded on their behalf by us. We hire companies to partner with us to develop our resource for the benefit of Albertans, and in return, they pay royalties and other fees for the mutual benefit of doing so. So as our contractor, we will make it a condition of their license that they report their emissions data to us as the owner, and then we will share it in a way that's compliant with the law.
And then when you're talking about the in-kind kind of clause in this whole thing, when you're talking about basically purchasing and selling oil through the government, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And why would you do that, though? Why would you force companies to take their oil off the open market?
Well, I can tell you a couple of reasons why. So, for instance, we know that the Americans have a strategic petroleum reserve that has been depleted. They need some of our heavy oil for that. So for us to be able to potentially negotiate a contract with the Department of Defense to ensure that they have the long-term energy security they need, that might be one of the things that they would like us to do. Governments like to deal with other governments. We also have a couple of other international jurisdictions that have come to us to seek long-term supply agreements of our bitumen, especially now that we're able to get it off the coast with TMX. They have approached private sector companies, and the other private sector companies have chosen not to do that. So that would be another one. A third one might be, especially with natural gas, being able to provide a secure supply of natural gas to data centers. They need the power generated from natural gas to be able to establish data centers. That might be another thing that we would do. So there are multiple ways in which I could imagine that we might be able to exercise that authority.
Jason.
Hi, Jason Marks out from CBC, Calgary. My small brain is having trouble understanding, connecting what you just talked about, the in-kind marketing to the oil and gas cap. I mean, what you just explained, it sounded like something you'd want to maybe do anyway, regardless of whether there was the oil and gas federal cap was in place. Can you help me link those two?
Sure. I mean, part of what the way our governments work is that one level of government can't tax another. We are asserting our ownership over our oil and gas resources. And if you go back to how Peter Lougheed won his battle in the first go-round with Justin Trudeau's father, it was by drilling oil wells or gas wells and establishing a company so that they could establish that they had the ownership right to prevent the federal government from imposing the NEP. So Peter Lougheed already created all of these mechanisms in the first fight. NEP was, of course, repealed in '84. We've had a relatively constructive relationship with our federal counterparts until now. And because we're seeing the same kind of behavior towards our sector this time, I think, which would be incredibly damaging and reduce production, we're going to use those same constitutional tools and legislative tools in order to be able to protect our constitutional rights.
My second question is that you're on one hand you're using very strong provocative language and proposing to do some major things that would be very provocative and unusual for a government that normally wants to be hands-off with business to do. On the other hand, though, you're also saying we're going to pass motions and talk about we're going to consider and explore the options of doing this. Is this a menu of things you might do, or are you saying that you will do all these things that you're threatening to do if the government enacts its oil and gas cap?
Well, look, they pushed us to the limit. We've been trying to negotiate with them now ever since the moment I had my first conversation with Justin Trudeau, where I told him that we wanted to align with their objectives to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. And we've had multiple letters, multiple meetings. We've had tables of deputy ministers together, and it's all been for naught. And so we're now at a point where we have to take action. So the structure of the Sovereignty Act is we put a motion towards the legislature to get an agreement in principle to develop the legislative framework to do these things. So some of them can be done through policy, some can be done through regulation, some of them will have to bring legislation back into legislature in the spring. But we want the legislature to fully know our intentions and all of the ways in which we're going to defend our constitutional rights to develop our resources.
Jonathan, go ahead.
Hi, Jonathan Bradley, Western Standard. So you spoke about the motion coming into effect and taking action right away. Why do you want to act now rather than wait until more details about the emissions cap comes out?
Well, look, I mean, the ha 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 ha. Inside joke from the press gallery last night. All right. Let me start that another way. So, tell me your question again. My apologies.
I just got it now. So you're talking about wanting to take action with the motion now rather than wait until more details come out
Yes.
about the
Look,
emission.
the emissions cap has been in place pretty much in this design from the moment that, I mean, even before I became Premier and before Minister Schulz became Environment Minister, Whitney Isaac was writing letters to Guilbeault to say the approach that you're proposing will not work. And so this has been out there floating around for a couple of years. We've been advocating and working with them to see if we could find some way of finding some common ground. All of that advocacy has not resulted in any change of direction whatsoever. And so we are now in the phase of regulation where they're consulting on the first round. They're not responding to any of our suggestions and pleas not to do this. And so we know that we've got to take these kinds of actions, because if they continue down this path, it will become law, very likely in the spring. And we want to be ready for all of the measures that we're going to take when that comes down.
So one of the ideas you mentioned in the proposal was to ensure that no provincial entity participates in the enforcement or implementation of the federal cap. How will you ensure that all of those entities comply with that component should you move forward on it?
Provincial entities get their power from provincial legislation. That's the key. I mean, the way our Constitution works is the federal government has their areas of jurisdiction and their agencies that are empowered by legislation passed in the Parliament. We have a number of different entities that get their power by legislation that is passed in our provincial legislature. So the entities would be a provincial public agency, a Crown-controlled organization, an entity that carries out a power or duty of function under the provincial government, an entity that receives a grant or other public funds from the provincial government that is contingent on the provision of a public service, a regional health authority, a public post-secondary institution, a school board, a municipality, a municipal or regional police service, or any other similar provincially regulated entity set out in the legislature. When it comes to the approach that we're taking with our energy companies who are developing the resource on our behalf, we will just make the emissions reporting data subject to the licensing agreement, as well as all of the access provisions. We'll make that subject to the licensing agreement as well.
We have time for one more in person, then we're going to go to the phone. So, Janet.
Why would you propose as a solution marketing and selling oil to the U.S. on the day that Trump has said he wants to put 25% tariffs on oil and gas products?
Look, I can't believe I keep saying that. You guys really caught me on that one. It's like a word whisker. I was in Toastmasters too, and that was the thing that they would always count. They never caught that one. They have to go do some voting. I would say I'm trying to find examples of how we might be able to use this authority, and I've been using this example as I've been presenting this to my cabinet, my caucus, and my colleagues. I wasn't anticipating the result that we've seen over the last couple of days. I don't think anyone was. In fact, I think that our strongest argument in approaching the United States is to talk to them about energy security and energy affordability. So we have always imagined that with an emissions cap, we would likely have to start negotiating directly with our American counterparts on getting more egress, getting more pipelines, getting pipelines expanded. That has been an ongoing discussion for many months, and it just so happens that it coincides with the decision that the Trump administration announced yesterday. My view on that is that you've got to take the Trump administration literally. When they say our problem is immigration, our problem is the fentanyl coming across the borders, our problem is you're not meeting your 2% NATO target, our problem is we don't want your country to be a backdoor for China to be able to get tariff-free products into our market. Those are the things we have to solve. And I look at those as different issues. The Americans will still need our secure supply of energy. One of the other things the Trump administration has campaigned on is reducing the cost for these kinds of products to their consumers. And we think we're a solution. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to work with our counterparts at the provincial level by leading with energy, leading with what we can do. But it does require the federal government to not have a double-minded approach when they go to the table. You can't go to the Americans and say, hey, look, we're your solution for energy security and affordability, but we're putting a cap on production in Canada. They've got to drop the production cap if we're going to have a meaningful and reasonable negotiation with the Trump administration.
So on tariffs, obviously this meeting tomorrow, we've got a senior government source, federal government source, saying it's not helpful for premiers like yourself and Doug Ford to agree in public that there are concerns about the border, that Canada has to present a unified front. So what is it that you want? Is it you want your own trade relationship with the U.S., or how committed are you instead to having this unified front that other jurisdictions seem to want tomorrow?
Well, I think the provinces will have a unified front. I think that the provinces have been raising for some time their concern that the actions of this government were wrecking our relationship with the United States and wrecking our trade relationship. You may recall when we got together in July, we stood together and said we wanted the federal government to meet its 2% NATO target because we feared that if they didn't do that, that we would see retaliation on the trade front. So the premiers have been alive to this for some time. And I think now we've just received a little bit more clarity about a couple of the other pressure points. And those are pressure points we've been raising for some months. The 1.8 million people were brought in last year in 2023. We began to see that the number of newcomers coming to Alberta was outpacing our ability to keep up, whether it was with home construction or school construction or getting family doctors. We've been asking the federal government to get a handle on this. We also have been fighting the fentanyl addiction crisis for years. We've been building on our entire recovery model so that we can deal with the addiction side of things, but also building specialty sheriff units so that we could attack this with our drug teams that are shutting down drug houses, with our special teams that have been doing fugitive apprehension. We've got additional teams that we've promised for fentanyl and for border control. There's a reason why we've raised these issues for the last number of years, is because we see that it's a problem. Now the Americans are seeing it's a problem too. So how about we work together to jointly solve a problem that is impacting both Canadians and Americans, and then get back to talking about trade.
We have time for a couple more questions, so we're going to go to the phones. Operator, first caller, please.
Your first question comes from the line of Tyler Dawson from National Post. Please go ahead.
Thanks for taking my question. I just wanted to ask, Section 2B of the legislation, I think, does not allow for a Sovereignty Act motion or legislation to put other institutions in violation of federal law. Does this not put, on the data sharing thing specifically, does this not put oil companies in a position of violating potential future federal law?
We don't believe so. We, as the owner of the resource, our intention would be to publicly report those emissions. As I mentioned before, the problem is that I don't believe that with the current Bill C-59 that our companies can accurately report their emissions without potentially facing some kind of sanction for it. So if they report to us and then we're able to report publicly in aggregate how we're doing on emissions, and then talk about how it's going down, which we know it will as energy intensity and emissions intensity goes down, we believe that we'll be in compliance. We'll be reporting that on behalf of those who are producing the resource on our behalf.
And my follow-up question is, apologies to the other reporters who maybe understand this better than I do, so I'm taking up time with a stupid question, but the in-kind thing that you were talking about, does that involve buying oil with tax dollars?
Well, when an energy company produces their product, they have a range of royalties that they own us depending on the market price and the productivity of the well. So we've got a very complicated royalty framework for that. And so normally they would pay us cash. They could also pay us the equivalent amount in barrels or in 1,000 cubic feet. And then we would pledge those barrels or cubic feet of gas to a consumer who would buy it. So what we would be looking to do would be to line up those contracts and then be able to provide it. Maybe we'll go to Germany. I know that the federal government didn't think that there was a business case to export LNG. We disagree. Maybe we'd go to Japan. Again, I think the federal government said there wasn't a case to export LNG. We disagree. And so because the federal government has done a very poor job of creating those market opportunities for us, we've watched that time and time again, we believe that we have the opportunity to do that. We've got the expertise with an entity that's been in operation since 1973, and we're looking forward to seeing some of those deals come together.
Operator, next caller, please.
Next question is from the line of Chris Darko from the Calgary Herald. Please go ahead.
Hi, Premier. Hi, Premier. Just going back to the issue of reporting on greenhouse gas emissions. Specifically, why would Alberta declare that all disclosed information related to GHG emissions be exclusively owned by the province of Alberta? Specifically, how does that help Alberta in the fight against the emissions gap?
I think what we're anticipating seeing is the federal government be punitive with individual companies on their emissions cap proposals. And we don't want any individual company to face any kind of sanction from the federal government when they're developing the resource on behalf of us, the people who own it. And so we look at our energy companies as partner in our development of our resources, and we accept that we want to see emissions go down. But remember, our strategy to reducing emissions and getting to carbon neutrality also looks at offsets. It looks at what if we were to reduce with our export of LNG the expansion of coal internationally? How would that offset emissions and getting credit for it? I mean, this is an argument that Shell just successfully made when they won a recent court challenge against them on the development of their product. The court said, well, if you didn't have these products, you'd have more coal, which means you'd have more emissions. Those are some of the arguments that we're making. And so if we are able to have a collective number for what our industry produces, and we have ways of offsetting that to get to neutrality, then we're going to be able to meet the objective. But what we don't want is individual companies being fearful of expanding production because of an arbitrary and unachievable cap that the federal government is bringing in. So that's our approach. Is we firmly believe that the companies should look at this and thank us for being willing to protect them from federal government overreach. They should be thankful that what we're trying to do is expand our production, out of which they will be a partner and beneficiary of that. So we're anticipating that this should be welcome by the energy sector.
Chris, do you have a follow-up?
Just to follow up. The federal rules under the Canadian Environmental Protection Act currently require large emitters, like oil sands operators, to report to Ottawa annually on their GHG emissions. So I guess what would you tell these oil and gas companies to do with your new proposal? Because it sounds like you're suggesting that they would simply ignore the federal regulations.
We'd expect them to report to us, and then we'll report on their behalf. That'll be a condition of their license. And the information will be reported. It'll just be reported through us.
Great. We have time for one more question, so operator, last caller, please.
Your next question comes from the line of Terry Fakowski from CTV Calgary. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I just wanted to return to the tariffs, if we can, for a moment. You have said that Alberta's energy industry should lead the discussions with the Trump administration with negotiations because of our close ties and reliance. However, he has pushed, self-reliance, drill, baby drill, if you will, south of the border. Do you have any concern that this is really a move away from that energy relationship?
I don't, because there's a couple of things. One is my understanding of their strategic reserve is that it's a blend of the type of oil they produce as well as our heavier blends. That would be one reason, is that they would need a heavy oil product. There are very few places in the world that you can get it. I heard the current President Biden muse about getting it from Venezuela or Iran. I think I can make the argument that Canada is a much better friend to the Americans than either of those jurisdictions. And the capacity in the Gulf Coast the refining capacity has been retooled to receive heavy oil product, which is perfectly suited to receive our product. So if you look at the Americans wanting to reduce their gasoline and diesel prices, they really should be working in partnership with us to be able to do so, because we're the ones who can provide that for them. In addition, the Americans, as I understand it, their total recoverable reserves in all of the country is 20 billion barrels. Alberta's reserves, oil in place, is 1 trillion barrels, and Alberta is 200 billion of recoverable. And we're just doing a reserve report to talk about best available technology. It may be even higher than that. We've got 200 trillion cubic feet of gas, which is basically inexhaustible. We've got ample natural gas liquids, and we also have ample pore space for carbon capture. So I would say that if you're looking long-term, as I think the Americans do, there may come a time when their own production ability falls off, and they need to be looking at reliable friends and partners to be able to backfill. But I think because of our unique blend that we have to offer, I think there's still a market for it in the United States.
Terry, do you have a follow-up?
And my follow-up, yes, please. My follow-up question is about the First Minister's meeting tomorrow. How confident are you going in there, speaking of, leading with the energy industry, just given how big of that relationship we have with the U.S.? How confident are you going in with, 13 different premiers having different priorities and not so friendly, obviously, to the energy sector in Alberta?
Look, I take nothing for granted. I mean, the president-elect has been very clear. He's talking about a 25% tariff on everything. He hasn't offered any kind of exemptions because there are other things to him that are more important. And he's been clear about what those are too. It's about illegal immigration and it's about the fentanyl crisis. And so I would hope that my counterparts at the table would realize that those are the things that we've got to address, whether it's through greater border security, more 24-hour border patrols. Maybe we have drones that are at the border. Maybe we just have more law enforcement. Maybe we have a more robust policy for deportation. We need to address that issue, and we need to address the issue of fentanyl. And as Doug Ford said, we've got a joint problem. We've got fentanyl supplies coming across the border, fentanyl going back across the border. Same thing with gun smuggling. Same thing with human trafficking. These are things that we have to deal with for both Canada's and America's sake. And so I would hope that we would take the president-elect literally on what it is he wants to see addressed. We've seen this tactic before with Mexico. He really did want to see Mexico make some changes to how they were managing the flow of people across the border in return for signing the last deal. And so when he tells you what it is he wants you to address, I think we shouldn't get distracted and think that we could maybe try to get side deals here or there. We have to address the issues head on and be prepared to meet the president on the things that he wants to see. And then we can move to having a more productive relationship about trade. I'm still hopeful that we'll be able to get 100% of our products in Canada shielded from tariffs. But at the moment, I don't think anything is safe. And I don't want to presume that the president would make some kind of special deal with Alberta if those foundational issues go unaddressed. We've got to address them.
Thanks, everyone. That concludes our press conference today.
Thanks, everyone.